Hey, chapter 11, lesson 15. Here we go, coming at you. Hey, I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving break. I know I did. I got to enjoy some family. I hope you guys did. Got to eat a lot of food. Having to wear sweatshirts now because all of a sudden it got cold. Actually, I was in Michigan enjoying the week off last week with my family, and I got out of there just in time. I think it snowed like 8 to 10 inches on my way south. We actually got a couple inches down here in Tennessee, but all of a sudden it got cold, and I don't know about you, but I moved down south for a reason. I don't like that cold weather. That's why I left. But anyways, guys, we are getting into chapter 11. We're going to take this in 2 lessons. Those of you that have been reading before we do these recordings or before you're doing a lesson, you have read chapter 11 and your head is going like this, right? I mean, it's a lot of stuff. There is a ton of history, okay? And so today we're going to get into all that stuff and get into all this history. And I know at times when we're reading this kind of stuff, it could get a little boring. And it's this person is that person, and then they married that person, the king of the north, the king of the south, and then they all seem to have the same names when you start studying who these people are. So it can get confusing, but I'm going to try to do this the best I can. Listen, chapter 11 of Daniel is probably one of the toughest chapters to teach in the Bible. Okay, especially these last couple chapters of Daniel, it's very difficult. Especially there's a couple chapters in Revelation as well, but this one's tough, and I'm going to do the best I can. It's going to be historically accurate. You won't believe how historically accurate Daniel chapter 11 is. Had a guy last night in the class, my good friend Jeff, he said the same thing. He's like, there's a lot of people that discredit Daniel chapter 11 and say that, well, that was written in 200 AD or 300 AD. There's no way that anybody could get that much prophecy correct and that much somebody get everything, pinpoint everything so perfectly. But we know the angel gave Daniel the message. We are Christians. We believe the Bible is 100% accurate, and these are prophecies from the Lord. And he can do all things, right? We know this. He can do all things through Christ. So let's get right into a little recap. Last 2 lessons, 2 weeks ago, I should say, the last lesson, we got into the kings of the north and kings of the south. That's what we're learning, right? We know that the kings of the north is kind of like the ancient Babylonian, Assyrian, and Persian empires. And then we have the king of the south, which makes up kind of the Egyptian empire, and you're talking about Egypt, those countries around the Red Sea, so Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, stuff like that. Okay, that's the king of the south. And we talked about how all of them are what? What are most of all the people that live in those regions? They're all Muslims, right? They're all Muslim nations. Okay, and we talked the difference about that, and we talked that in the end, when we read Daniel chapter 11, at the end, the king of the north rises as the breadwinner, or he defeats the king of the south, and he becomes the main winner, the king of the north. And who is the king of the north at the end of chapter 11? It is the Antichrist, right? So we had to talk about that. So let's go. I got a first slide here. It's a quick recap. The caliphate is the religious ruler and political chief of the Muslim community. Yes, I know, I spelt political wrong. Hey, I'm not perfect, man, only Jesus is. I just now noticed that. I think I've showed that a few times. But the first caliph was Muhammad. So the caliph is the religious leader and ruler of the Muslim community, kind of like how the Pope would be for the Catholic or some Christian denominations. And of course, we have two denominations of Islam. We have Sunni Muslims, right? And we talked about this. This is the predominant belief in the south section of the Middle East. So we're talking about those around the Red Sea, like I said, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and stuff like that. And the Sunni Muslims is going to be the kings of the south when we get into Daniel chapter 11. But these guys are very, very liberal, very worldly. Okay? And of course, we have the Shiite Muslims. Those are the nations to the northeast of Israel, so Iraq, Iran, Syria, parts of Turkey, stuff like that. And Shiite Muslims believe that the caliph must be in the direct bloodline of the descendant Muhammad. And what really separates these two guys is these guys are very conservative. These are what we would call Quran thumpers. And we talked about how ISIS came on the scene a few years ago. ISIS were Shiite Muslims. They were doing pretty much exactly what the Quran tells them to do. They were doing their best ability to do that. Okay? So, right now, these two regions, the kings of the north and kings of the south, present day, there is some animosity. We're talking about Iran and Saudi Arabia. These are where these two kings of the north are probably going to be coming from here in the end times, because we talked about Mecca and stuff like that. But they're in what we would call a Cold War right now. Okay, Iran and Saudi Arabia hate each other, and they're constantly threatening war, and they don't like each other, and they're just kind of always battling back and forth. It's been like that for quite some time, a very long time actually, since these prophecies have been going out. But eventually, coming soon, and especially during the 7-year tribulation, it's not going to be such a Cold War anymore. It's going to get real hot. I mean, real heated. Okay, and so what's going to take place, guys, is eventually we're going to have some other wars going around in the world. And people, especially the United States, won't be around, or I should say, we're not going to be paying attention to the Middle East as much as we do now. Okay? Things are going to distract us, and we're going to take our eyes off of what's going on there. Some other wars are going to start, especially China, when they start taking over some nations, which they're going to be doing pretty soon. Okay? You got to watch out for these guys. I'm telling you, it's going to be a big deal. But once the eye kind of comes off the ball and we get distracted, the Middle East is going to rev up. If you remember, like we talked about last time, a few years ago, especially about 2014, 15, and into 16, we had ISIS kind of revving up that area, and they kind of created their own army, so to speak, but they almost came out of nowhere, right? It was just like, what happened? All of a sudden, they're strong, and they're taking over Mosul and all these places. Like, wow, well, that's going to be kind of how it will be like when the Antichrist comes into power. Okay, it's just they're going to come out of nowhere. It's going to start real small, and all of a sudden, they're just going to keep growing. And if nobody's around there to really put a stop to it, or if somebody's allowing them to do this, they're just going to keep growing in power. So it just kind of setting a stage here, because when we get into chapter 11 here, we're going to be talking, of course, like I told you guys before, we can take Antiochus Epiphanes out of your pocket today. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. You guys got to hold on to him for so long. But Antiochus Epiphanes was an Antichrist type. And so when we get into the scriptures, we are going to compare him to the Antichrist. And it is, I think, verses 21 through 39, where we talk about Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's verses 33 through 39 is where we kind of have a dual prophecy going on, where we're kind of talking about Antiochus Epiphanes and what he did and how the Antichrist is going to be doing stuff. And then in verse 40 is when you make the switch. And I told the class yesterday, I actually said, hey, go ahead and read verse 40. And you know what, I'll go ahead and do that for you. And we don't have to put that on there, but I can just read it. But it says, and at the time of the end. Okay, verse 40 says that in chapter 11. When it says, and at the time of the end, you know right then that now you are making the switch. You were saying, okay, we're no longer comparing Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist, and now we're strictly talking about the time of the end, the last days and the 7-year tribulation, solely on the Antichrist. That's when you make the switch. And there's a lot of different viewpoints in chapter 11. It's a lot of stuff to go over. But guys, just use your brains. When the Lord, or when the scriptures say, and the time of the end, now you know, okay, we're making the total switch. We're no longer talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. We're talking about the time of the end. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes lived around 150 BC or something like that. Okay, I could be off a little bit, but you guys know what I'm talking about. All right, so real quick, I got a couple of slides here just about the kings of the south. Okay, I kind of wanted to show you, if you're not familiar, about Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Okay, I got a little slide here. It's kind of like a map. This is kind of like the king of the south here, is what we're all around the Red Sea. But particularly Saudi Arabia. You see the UAE, that's United Arab Emirates. And then there's a little Thailand island. If you look at the Persian Gulf, and there's Qatar there. It's not really an island. I guess it's like a peninsula. But these are some of the richest cities and countries in the world. I mean, super rich. And of course, when you go up north, you see Iraq and Syria, and that's kind of like the kings of the north. But let's talk about, let's just look at a couple slides I have here here's Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Okay? And just look at that. Guys, this is not some third world country. This isn't a bunch of guys wearing turbans wandering around in the desert and doing nothing. And I'm not trying to be facetious here, but these guys are just as advanced as us, if not more. I mean, these guys got some incredible things going on. So there's Riyadh, right? Here's Qatar. There's Qatar. Does that look like a third world country? Guys, these guys got a ton of money. I mean, they are super rich. Bunch of oil tycoons, okay? Back in the 80s and 90s, well, actually for a very long time, this is how they made their money. Okay, there's Qatar. Then we have, the next slide is Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi, that's United Arab Emirates. I mean, just look at some of these magnificent structures. Look what they did with the beaches and the road and that bridge there. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, these guys got some serious dinero. You know what I'm saying? All right, so next we have Dubai. That's United Arab Emirates as well, Dubai. But, I mean, just look at that. I think they have the tallest skyscraper in the world. I could be wrong about that, but it is huge. But just look at this, how the ocean and the water is intertwined with the city. I mean, it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. I mean, it's somewhere, I mean, I'd love to go there and just hang out and just check that out. I mean, it's amazing. So these guys got a ton of cash, okay? And so I wanted to kind of show you what's going on with that. But on the other hand, we get to the king of the north, and when we talk about that, we're really talking about the kind of Persian Empire, and especially in Iran. And these guys are kind of known for their tyrannical leadership, right? And they're constantly threatening everyone. They're threatening Saudi Arabia all the time. They're threatening the United States. They're threatening Israel. And they absolutely can't stand us. And so we kind of already talked about that a couple lessons ago. But they are at total odds with Saudi Arabia. And like I said, that is eventually going to gear up, and especially when we get close to the 7-year tribulation and into the 7-year tribulation. So, got a little history lesson there, got a little background on what we're going to be doing. We're going to go ahead and get to verse 2. Guys, we're going to get to verse 32 today. We're going to get to verse 32, and we're going to stop, and then we're going to finish that the rest of chapter 11 next lesson. It's just so much to go over. You guys, it's a lot. It's a lot for me to even talk about, and a lot of studying, a lot. It's just going to, I'm trying to break it up so it doesn't completely overwhelm you, okay? But it's something we got to do. It's part of the book of Daniel, and we got to get through it. And so we'll do 32 through the rest of the chapter next lesson, and then we'll just have one chapter left, chapter 12, and we're going to knock that one out, okay? So after today, we'll have 2 more lessons, and we're completely done with Daniel. Amen? All right. So verse 2. I'm going to read it real quick. And then I'm going to do a lot of explaining and stuff. That's how we're going to kind of work this. The reason why I'm not doing verse 1 is if you remember last lesson, a lot of your translations have verse 1 in chapter 10. Okay, and we kind of put that in there a couple last lesson. So I'm just going to go ahead and start at verse 2. And very well, it should probably be in chapter 10, but some of them have verse 1 in chapter 11. So let's go to verse 2. It says, "And now..." And I am going to, we have the NLT up, and that's fine, because I'm going to read from the NLT the whole time, but I'm going to read this verse from the KJV, because sometimes you got to go back to KJV, it's just better, okay? "And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all the armies of the realm of Greece." Okay, so here we go. I got a list of kings here. And we're going to be doing a lot of kings, and we're going to be talking about a lot of this stuff, guys, so get ready. Got a list of kings here. It says 3 kings shall rise. That is Cyrus the Great. Then we have Cambyses, and then we have Darius, followed by a 4th, who is far richer, right? It says in the scripture, that would be Xerxes, okay? Xerxes, who starts up a fight with Greece. So let's talk about these guys real quick, okay? Let's talk about Darius. First, let's get with Darius. And I just taught this last night, and it's a lot to go over, so I got to get my brain ready because I'm telling you, it's a lot. So Darius, when he comes to power, Lord help me. Give me strength to get my brain wrapped around this stuff. Darius comes into power, and he immediately takes the Persian Empire and he expands it to heights never before seen. Okay? So he expands his empire into Egypt, into Ethiopia, and into Saudi Arabia. Okay? And over into India and parts of Pakistan. This is what made the Persian Empire enormous. Okay? He makes the Persian Empire its absolute height. Okay? And he built an enormously wealthy empire. And so what happens is when he gets to the height of his empire, he dies. He's older. And he gives, or the empire goes to his son, Xerxes, okay, who is the fourth king. And Xerxes takes over a very well-established empire. And he is awarded all the pleasure of collecting all the taxes, all the annual tribute from all these nations his father did, and he becomes very wealthy and very rich. Okay? And then, of course, during Xerxes' reign, he decides to go up against Greece and Macedonia. Okay? And the Spartans. We've talked about this before. If you guys have seen the movie 300. If you've seen the movie 300, it was Xerxes, King Xerxes of Persia, in that movie, who goes up against King Leonidas of Sparta and some of the Greek soldiers, and the 300 of them ended up holding off an army of almost 1 million for like 7 days, okay? This is historically accurate. That was Xerxes. It was Xerxes who goes in and starts messing around with the Greek Empire. And eventually, that would be the downfall of the Persian Empire. They start messing with the Greeks and the Macedonians and some of the Italians, and it just starts falling apart. And about 100 years after Xerxes is gone, the Persian Empire falls. About 120, 130 years, something like that, to who? Alexander the Great, right? Okay, so we just read verse 2. Let me switch over to NLT. So that's what we'll be reading for the rest of the thing here. But verse 2 says, he will use his wealth to stir up everyone to fight against the kingdom of Greece. That is Xerxes. Okay, you're going to be amazed how accurate this chapter is. Then a mighty king will arise to power, who will rule with great authority and accomplish everything he sets out to do. This was verse 3. A mighty king will arise. After they stir up against Greece, like I just said, who is this mighty king that's going to arise? Alexander the Great. Okay? Verse 4, it says, but at the height of his power, Alexander the Great's power, his kingdom will be broken apart and divided into 4 parts. I have talked about this until we have almost vomited. Right, guys? I mean, I've probably showed this slide a million times. We're going to show it again. Okay? Says the rest of verse 4 says, it will not be ruled by the king's descendants, nor will the kingdom hold the authority it once had, for his empire will be uprooted and given to others. Okay, so verse 3 and 4. Alexander the Great, at the height of his power, he dies, and he splits up, the kingdom is split up into 4 different parts. So, once again, we have seen this a few different times. Those 4 generals, after about a 15, 20 years of what we call the Diadachi Wars, these were the wars of the generals and advisors and all the people of Alexander the Great's army and kingdom. They're all fighting each other for power. 4 generals come out on top after all is said and done, after the dust settled. And that was Ptolemy the First, and this is the king of the south. Okay, and he takes Egypt and surrounding nations, and Seleucus, he takes over the ancient Persian Empire. And Lysimachus takes over Turkey and Anatolia Empire, really the Phoenician Empire over there. And then we have Antipater and his son who take over Greece and Macedonia. Okay? And like I said before, is what we have called the Diadachi Wars. This is the struggle and battles by the generals and commanders of the Greek army who wrestled for the territories after Alexander had died. And we're going to get into this a little bit. Alexander on his deathbed actually gave parts of his kingdom to certain advisors and to certain generals, But after he died, this one said, no, he didn't say that. This one said, no, I don't care what he says. I'm taking over this kingdom. And that's what the Diadachi's wars start up. But we are going to be talking particularly about two of these kingdoms, the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire. Okay, the Ptolemaic Empire is the king of the south, and the Seleucid Empire is the king of the north. And we've talked about this before. The king of the south is Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and the king of the north is ancient Persia, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires. Okay? Well, that is what we are doing. Verse 5. The king of the south will increase in power, but one of his own officials will become more powerful than he, and he will rule his kingdom with great strength. All right. So here we go. The king of the south. This is the first ruler of the Ptolemaic Empire. And he was one of the generals in his army, which was called Ptolemy the First. So I have a slide right here. It says, after the death of Alexander the Great and the Diadachi Wars, these are the two guys we're going to be talking about. Okay? And this is what verse 5 is talking about. You have Ptolemy Soter. He rules as the pharaoh and ruler of Egypt during this time. And later we're going to have Seleucus Nicator, who is the king of the north, okay, and the Seleucid Empire. So let's bust down verse 5 real quick. It says, the king of the south will increase in power, but one of his own officials will become more powerful than he, and he will rule his kingdom with great strength. So let's talk about this. Seleucus would eventually become the king of the north, but this did not happen overnight for young Seleucus. Okay, after the abrupt death of Alexander the Great, Seleucus sides with a man by the name of Paradisus. Okay, and Paradisus quickly takes control of the Greek Empire after the death of Alexander the Great. Okay, and so Seleucus helps him do this. And eventually, Seleucus is put in control, or I should say he is made satrap or governor of Babylon. Okay? And we had some other wars going on. We had the Diadachi Wars revving up and stuff like that. But he becomes the governor or satrap of Babylon. But it was short-lived. The Diadachi Wars started revving up again. And Seleucus is forced to go south to his old friend Ptolemy. Now, Seleucus and Ptolemy were very good friends. Okay, these guys were very, very good friends. And so Seleucus kind of looks up to Ptolemy. And actually, when Ptolemy was during these Diadachi Wars, Seleucus actually helped Ptolemy regain some of his kingdom back and push some of the commanders from Greece away from him. Okay, so these guys are good friends. So while he was the satrap of Babylon, the wars are ramping up again, and he gets pushed south to his old friend. And so what happens is Ptolemy says, hey man, I got your back. Come here and stay here. I'll make you one of my generals or advisors, and you can hang out here for a while. If you see in verse 5, it says, the king of the south will increase power, but one of his own officials will become more powerful than he. Who is this official? This is Seleucus. Seleucus becomes one of Ptolemy's officials. Okay? And so eventually, after a few years goes by, Seleucus says, hey, Pharaoh, Ptolemy, why don't you help me one last time to regain Babylon, regain the land that I had lost on the wars a few years back. Will you help me? And Ptolemy says, you know what, I got you. I'm going to help you. I'll send an army with you, and we're going to regain this Babylon and part of this area back, and then we can both become great allies. You can have your kingdom, I'll have mine, and we'll work together, and we're friends. It's going to be awesome, right? And it works out great. They are successful. He takes over the king of the north, or the old Persian Empire, and it works out great. But eventually, these guys will become bitter rivals. And when they do, these guys rival each other from here on all the way to the very end of time. Okay? And so that's what it says in verse 5, that he will become more powerful and he will rule his kingdom with great strength. Eventually, the Seleucid Empire would be much more powerful than the Ptolemaic Empire. Okay, so that's what verse 5 is talking about. Okay, these guys would become bitter rivals. They'd be fighting over Syria and Lebanon and different lands. And of course, it was probably about money and power, just like everything else seems to be an issue. And these guys would then eventually hate each other. Okay, yeah, I know. We're just getting started. We got lots of history going on. All right, so we got verse 6 here. It says, verse 6, some years later, an alliance will be formed between the king of the north and the king of the south. The daughter of the king of the south will be given in marriage to the king of the north to secure the alliance. But she will lose her influence over him, and so will her father, and she will be abandoned along with her supporters. What are we talking about here? I got another slide here. This is the agreement. The agreement for peace, or as it says, the alliance. Okay? This is what took place. Ptolemy II. Okay, this is Ptolemy I's son. We have the second emperor or second pharaoh here, the Ptolemaic Empire. And we're talking about Antiochus II. So what this is about is Ptolemy gives his daughter, Berenice, in marriage to Antiochus II to end the Second Syrian War, to end a war. And what the agreement was that any children born from his daughter and Antiochus would succeed the throne. They will be the next king of the Seleucid Empire. That was the agreement of peace. This is the agreement. But, as we're reading, verse 6, it says, but she will lose her influence over him, and so will her father, Berenice says, and she will be abandoned along with her supporters. So, what takes place is Antiochus II says, okay, I'll do this, I'll marry your daughter Berenice. Okay? But Antiochus II already had a queen, okay, by the name of Laodice. Okay? And Laodice is shipped off like 400 or 500 miles away, and she's ousted as the queen, and here comes a new queen. Well, what takes place is Laodice becomes very upset. She's very ticked off at what just took place. Okay? But Laodice is very powerful. She is a very influential woman, very political, and obviously she is upset and vengeful at her divorce, and so she engineers a coup d'etat, which is what a hostile takeover of a current regime. Okay? And so during this takeover, she has Berenice and her infant son murdered. Okay? She has them murdered, and then not too long after that, she actually, making sure my notes are right because I got a lot going on here. She has Antiochus II poisoned, which completes the coup d'etat. Okay? So this is what it means. In verse 6, where it says, she will be abandoned along with her supporters. Berenice is no longer, her son is no longer, and Laodice kills them all, and now she's sitting as queen, okay? And her son is going to be the next king, but just a little tidbit here of information. Her son is very young, so Queen Laodice runs the empire until her son is of age, okay? Now, let's go to verse 7 and 8. Trying to go slow. I'm trying to go thorough, guys. I know it's a lot, okay? Verse 7 and 8. But when one of her relatives, whose relatives? Berenice's relatives, becomes king of the south, because she was the one who was given from the south. One of her relatives becomes king of the south. He will raise an army and enter the fortress of the king of the north and defeat him. When he returns to Egypt, he will carry back their idols with him, along with the priceless articles of gold and silver. For some years later afterward, he will leave the king of the north alone. All right. Berenice we're talking about here. When one of her relatives becomes king of the south. What relative is that? This is her brother. Ptolemy II dies. Her brother, which I have a slide here, verses 7 and 8 here. This is the next one to come to power, Ptolemy the Third. Okay? And what he does is he invades the Seleucid Empire. He sees what's going on. He says, hey, these guys murdered my sister. They murdered my nephew. He is supposed to be the next king of the Seleucid Empire. They didn't honor the agreement that we made with my father. And you know what? I'm coming after you. So in an act of revenge for his sister Berenice's death and her son, he goes to war. Okay, and it's an all-out battle. And this is what we call the Laodicean War. Okay, the Laodicean War. Because Queen Laodice pretty much started this war. It's also called the Third Syrian Empire, or I'm sorry, the Third Syrian War. But majority of people call it the Laodicean War. Okay, and so Ptolemy III ends up being highly successful in this war. He takes over a lot of land, and this becomes actually the height of the Ptolemaic Empire under him, after he defeats Laodice and all of the stuff like that. He does not kill Laodice, but he takes over a lot of the land. Okay, so let's go on to verse 9. Later, the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, but will soon return to his own land. Now we're talking about the king of the north. Who is this? Verse 9, I have a slide here. This is Seleucus II Callinicus, something like that. Okay? This was Laodice's son. Remember I said he was of young age. He has now come a little bit older. And this verse 9 tells of the desperate attempt to regain some of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, and he does have little success. He eventually takes over northern Syria and Phoenicia and to kind of bolster and maintain the Seleucid Empire, because it was about to crumble and fall. It was hanging on by a thread, but he kind of rallies to at least get some of his land, just a little bit of his land back, to at least continue the Seleucid Empire. Okay? All right. Verses 10. Verse 10. However, the sons of the king of the north will assemble a mighty army that will advance like a flood and carry the battle as far as the enemy's fortress. Okay, verse 10. Who are we talking about? The sons of the king of the north. This was who we just talked about, Seleucus II. His son is Antiochus the Great. Okay, and what Antiochus the Great did is he instilled all of his brothers as generals and advisors. And this is what the scriptures mean, that the king of the north will invade the realm of the king. However, the sons of the king of the north will assemble a mighty army. Whose sons are these? This is Seleucus II's sons. Antiochus the Great is now the king, and it's all of him and his brothers do all the damage here. So let's talk about Antiochus the Great for a second. Okay, Antiochus the Great, his name is Antiochus Epiphanes the Third, and all these guys are named the same, but I don't want you to get confused. It was his son is the one who sets up the statue of Zeus in the temple. And if you guys have read the book of Maccabees, and who we're going to talk about from verses 32 or whatever it was, 21 to 39, I think it is in chapter 11. It was his son. So right now we're going to be talking about Antiochus the Great. Okay, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, the one who sets up Zeus' father. Don't want you to get confused on this. A lot of these guys' names are all the same. So I just want you to know we're not quite to him yet. We're with Antiochus the Great. Okay, but that was verse 10. It says, verse 11, then in a rage, the king of the south will rally against the vast forces assembled by the king of the north and will defeat them. Okay, Antiochus the Great comes into power. He installs his brothers, right, as generals. And they are very successful at first, okay? And they raise a great army against the Ptolemaic Empire, and they advance south towards Lebanon and Phoenicia and into Israel, and they get into Palestine. However, something happens at the Battle of Raphia, or the Battle of Gaza, which is the southern part of Israel. Okay, this is kind of where Palestine would be, over in the Gaza Strip. He loses a battle there, and Antiochus the Great is sent kind of packing with his tail between his legs. What takes place? How does he lose this battle? There was an up-and-coming power called the Roman Republic at this time. Okay, and so they were kind of buddies with Egypt. And so Egypt kind of calls on the Roman Republic and says, hey, we got some problems with this guy. It's going to be bad for business. It's going to be bad for trade. And so they kind of come and they help drive Antiochus the Great out of there. Okay, and he heads back north. Okay, and you're going to see throughout time this is going to be the arch nemesis of Antiochus the Great throughout his life. It seems to be the Roman Republic's always standing in his way. Okay, so let's go on to verse 12. It says, after the enemy army is swept away, whose enemy's army is swept away? Antiochus the Great, the king of the north, is swept away. The king of the south will be filled with pride and will execute many thousands of his enemies, but his success will be short-lived. So what happens? The king of the south, and we are talking about Ptolemy the Fourth, and this kind of talks about verses 11 through 14. Ptolemy the Fourth comes into power. He sweeps Antiochus the Great away with the help of the Roman Republic, and so he becomes very puffed up with pride after his success, and he starts oppressing his people greatly. Okay, Ptolemy the Fourth begins to execute all who don't agree with his policies, his political ideas and his military ideas. Okay, and he becomes a tyrant king. Okay, all across the provinces, and so to the extent that his own people begin to absolutely hate them, and eventually we're going to read that they're going to start to revolt. Okay, this guy's a tyrant. Verses 13 and 14 says, a few years later, the king of the north will return with a fully equipped army far greater than before. At that time, this is Antiochus the Great, okay? He comes up there with a great army, okay? At that time, there will be a general uprising against the king of the south. Why is this? I just told you he is a tyrant king. There's an uprising. We have lots of civil war going on. They can't seem to take care of all the provinces they have because he is just killing everybody or he's taxing them to death, and they just can't stand him. Okay? The Bible is amazing. This book is amazing how historically accurate it is. And I'll just stop real quick, guys. Go on, do your history lesson on Wikipedia, and just start looking at the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire, and go down the kings, and you'll be amazed on how accurate the Bible is. In fact, some of those stuff is going to reference the Bible as its historical context. It's amazing, okay? Now I've probably done lost where I was at. I think I was on verse 14. There will be a general uprising against the king of the south. Violent men among your own people will join them in fulfillment of this vision, but they will not succeed, okay? This is talking about when he says violent men among your own, I'm going to make sure what I'm doing here. Violent men among your own people. He's talking to Daniel, because what happens is Israel actually is one of these people who are become an uprising against the king of the south, or Ptolemy the Fourth here, because he's such a tyrant. That's what that means on that verse. Okay? But they will not succeed. It says, verse 15 here, says, the king of the north will come and lay siege to a fortified city. Here we go. Fortified city, and capture it. Who is this king of the north that's coming? It is Antiochus the Great once again. Okay? Antiochus the Great. And he will capture it. The best troops of the south will not be able to stand in the face of the onslaught. So what takes place is Antiochus the Great kind of waits patiently for his opportunity to pounce on the king of the south. When does this happen? When Ptolemy the Fourth dies. Ptolemy the Fourth dies, and all of a sudden we have Ptolemy the Fifth, who is like a 12 or 13-year-old kid. Okay, and so he waits for this opportunity to pounce on him. And I have a slide here, verses 15 and 16. This is what this deals with, is the wars between Ptolemy V and Antiochus the Great. Okay, so we're talking about Ptolemy V. And what took place, like I said, is Antiochus the Great waits for his father to die, and so he's the young child, and this makes it a lot easier in defeating Ptolemy V. Okay? But it says, he will lay siege to a fortified city. This is still verse 15. That fortified city that he lays his siege to is the Battle of Panium. Okay? This was a huge battle, this fortified city. And this battle transferred control of all of Syria, Lebanon, and parts of Israel from the king of the south to the king of the north, or from the Ptolemaic Empire to the Seleucid Empire. Okay? And so that's what that verse means on that one. It also says the best troops of the south will not be able to stand on the face of the onslaught. They stand no match against Antiochus the Great here. Verse 16. The king of the north will march onward unopposed. None will be able to stop him. He will pause in the glorious land of Israel, intent on destroying it. Okay, so this is talking about Antiochus the Great starts going south into Syria and Lebanon and Israel, and he's just marching south, right? I mean, he's going for it. And but once again, we're going to see here in a second that he is met with the Roman Republic and is halted once again. Okay, we have this rising power over there called the Roman Republic, which is eventually going to be the Roman Empire. And he is met with them once again and is halted. Okay, but let's go to verse 17 here. It says, he will make plans to come with the might of his entire kingdom and will form an alliance with the king of the south. He will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom from within, but his plan will fail. Okay, Antiochus the Great is marching south. Once again, he is threatened by the Roman Republic, and he has to stop. So what does he do? He devises another plan. What is that plan? To form an alliance with the king of the south and give him a daughter in marriage. Okay, so Antiochus the Great gives his daughter in marriage to the king of the south. Who is this daughter? This is Cleopatra. Not the Cleopatra with Mark Antony. That was a little bit later, but her name is Cleopatra. Okay, and so he gives his daughter in marriage, but it also says here in verse 17, he will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom from within, but his plan will fail. So his plan is to overthrow the kingdom, but it also says his plan will fail. Why does his plan fail? Because his daughter, Cleopatra, falls madly in love with Ptolemy V. Okay, she absolutely loves him, and she absolutely loves being the queen of Egypt. So she's sitting down there. She's like, man, I'm the queen of Egypt. I have a great empire. It's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. I get everything I want. I have an awesome husband. And so she changes her mind. She's like, I got a pretty good thing going here. Why am I going to try to uproot this kingdom and give it to my father when I kind of like being here? I kind of like being the queen of Egypt, right? And so she sides with her husband. And so Antiochus the Great's plan fails. Okay? Verse 18. Verse 18 says, after this, he will, after what? After his plan fails of his daughter, he will turn his attention to the coastland and conquer many cities. What coastland is that? We're talking about he's going up Turkey and he's going into the Aegean Sea and starting to head over into Greece over here. It says, but a commander from another land will put an end to his insolence and cause him to retreat in shame. Verse 19 says, he will take refuge in his own fortress, but will stumble and fall and be seen no more. Okay, verse 18 again. It says, so here we go. Antiochus the Great is conquering some of these island cities off the Mediterranean into the Aegean Sea, and he starts heading over into Greece. Okay, but this commander from another distant land is who? The Roman Republic again. Here he goes again. This is time number 3, his arch nemesis. So what takes place? Antiochus the Great starts capturing some of these islands, and he goes into Greece and Thrace and Macedonia. and he starts messing around with them because he couldn't take over Egypt. Okay, but then he is met with the Roman Republic, and he loses the Battle of Thermopylae. And when he does this, he loses his giant elephant brigade. If you know anything about Antiochus, some of you history fans, they know that they had this wonderful army of elephants. It was very intimidating, very crazy, and they just did a lot of damage and won a lot of battles with this. But he loses this elephant brigade, and he loses the Battle of Thermopylae, and he also loses the Battle of Magnesia. Magnesia, I guess that's how you say that. And this would cause Antiochus the Great to retreat back east to the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. So he's back Turkey, back to his own land, crosses back over. He ain't messing around with Greece no more. He has to retreat back over there. Okay? And so what takes place is Rome finally gets really aggravated with him this time. This is the third time they had to mess around with him. And so what they do is they say, hey, Antiochus, because you've come against us like this, the third, 3 strikes and you're out. You are going to pay for all of the war efforts that we have had to pay for during your campaign. We've had to send all of our stuff over here, all of our army, and all the provisions and stuff we had to spend for your war over here in Greece. Now we're going to make you pay us. You're going to start paying us, and you're going to pay us all back, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so he pretty much ends up, Antiochus the Great ends up dying once he goes back to Syria not too long after his last bout with Rome. Okay, so we get into verse 20. This is what verse 20 is all about. His successor, who's the successor? Seleucus the fourth here, and we're going to get to that in a second. His successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. But after a very brief reign, he will die, though not from anger or in battle. I got a slide here. Verse 20, this is the tax collector. This is Seleucus the fourth. After the death of Antiochus the Great, he pretty much has a horrible job and a horrible empire trying to maintain his empire. He's having to not only keep up his own affairs, but he has to what? He has to pay for all of the stuff his father did, all the wars. So he is sending out tax collectors all over the land, trying to pay for his father's war efforts over there in Greece, to pay Rome so they don't come after him anymore. And he's also trying to keep his own kingdom afloat. So this is what it means that he sends out a tax collector. He is burdened to have to pay for all this stuff, and I'm sure his tenure was absolutely terrible. Okay, and he doesn't reign but, 11 years. It says in verse 20, but after a very brief reign, he will die, though not from anger or in battle. All right. Then we get into verse 21. Okay. And now, verse 21 through 39, we start to talk about Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, we get to start talking about him. We get to talk about him for a while now, because he is an Antichrist type. And as we're reading these next scriptures, we're going to see how closely he really is to the Antichrist. But before we do that, let's talk about Antiochus Epiphanes for a second. Antiochus Epiphanes is the main villain in the book of Maccabees. And we are going to read the first chapter of Maccabees today, just so I can show you how accurate the first chapter of Maccabees is to what we're talking about here. It's amazing. Okay? The book of Maccabees is part of the Apocrypha. Okay, there are 14 books in the Apocrypha in all, and these are not in our canonized Protestant Bible. Some of these Apocrypha books are in the Catholic Bible, which include the first and second Maccabees. And I can't name all the ones that are in the Catholic Bible, but some of them are in the Catholic Bible. So what does that tell you? We know that about 50% of all Christians, or 50% of all the church on earth are what? Their denomination is what? Catholic. So 50% of everybody reading in their Bibles, it has some of these books in them. Okay, I'm not saying that some should not be in there. Definitely not. There are some books that you really got to discern. You kind of read some, and some that are not 100% accurate. You got a lot of Jewish folklore and some kind of tall tales, so you kind of got to be mindful of that. I know some of you guys read Enoch and stuff like that, and you really got to watch what your P's and Q's on that, because not everything is 100% accurate. Okay, but there are a couple books that are. And 1st and 2nd Maccabees is. Why it is not in our Bibles, I do not know. It is amazing. And it proves the fact that the Lord did not sleep for 400 years. Okay, I know a lot of, you got the 400 dark years where the Lord never spoke. I guarantee you, the Bible states the Lord never sleeps and never slumbers, right? And I'm sure he didn't sleep and slumber for 400 years before Jesus Christ was born. That's probably the most important time, right before Jesus Christ was about to be born. I guarantee you the Lord wasn't sleeping for those 400 years. But anyways, back to Antiochus Epiphanes, before we read this. Antiochus the Great, this is Antiochus Epiphanes' father, he loses the war over there in Greece, right? So what happens? When he loses this war, a lot of generals, a lot of his advisors, and some of his own sons, including Antiochus Epiphanes, are captured and taken prisoners of war over to Rome, where they are imprisoned. Antiochus Epiphanes was one of those. Okay, he is taken captive, and he is sent to Rome, and he is a prisoner in Rome. And he spends about 15 years in prison in Rome. But while he's doing that, he's learning the customs of Rome. He's learning Greek mythology. He actually accepts and takes a lot of the Roman policies and practices in, and he even converts to the Greco-Roman religion. So we're talking about Greek gods, okay, at this point in time. Hence he sets up the statue of Zeus in the temple later. But he accepts a lot of the Roman stuff, and what takes place is after about 15 years, he somehow persuasively talks some of the prison guards into releasing him and allowing him to go home. Okay, so immediately upon his release, he orchestrates the poisoning of his brother, the Seleucid king, Seleucus IV. This is his brother. Okay, he has his own concubine. Antiochus Epiphanes has Seleucus IV, his brother's own concubine, poison him. Okay, and a little bit later, he cements his kingship by murdering Seleucus V, which is his brother's son or his nephew. So he kills his brother, then he kills his nephew, who is very, very young. Okay, I think only a couple of years old. Okay, and now he is the king. So when we read verse 21, it says, "The next to come into power will be a despicable man," who is Antiochus Epiphanes, "who is not in line for royal succession." He is not in line for royal succession. Why? Because he kills his brother and he kills his nephew. It was his brother and his nephew, and then obviously his nephew's son later. That would be the line, the royal line. But he kills them both, and now he steps in. Okay? And it says, "He will slip in when least expected and take over the kingdom with flattery and intrigue." Okay? So we know we were talking about somebody who's a sneaky little rat. He's like a little snake in the grass. Okay, he's coming in there, sneaking in there, and kind of abruptly takes over the kingdom. Very quietly, but very quickly. Verse 22. And I have a little slide here. I think it says Antiochus Epiphanes IV. I mean, I don't know if that's what it looks like, but hey, that's the best picture I can come up with. But this is who we're talking about. And look, he only reigns for like 11 years, guys. But this guy did a lot of stuff in 11 years. Okay? But here we go. Let's go verse 22. It says, "Before him great armies will be swept away, including a covenant prince." Okay? So verse 22, he's sweeping a lot of armies away. He's gaining some land. But notice how it says covenant prince. When it says that, now you know we're talking about a spiritual battle. A covenant prince. This is something going along in the spiritual heaven, powers in the heavenly places. So I find that interesting that the Bible says, hey, not only is this going on here, but he takes him and his army. There's a spiritual backing behind some of these empires and some of these whatever you guys want to, nations. Okay? Let's go to verse, there we go, verse 23. I got my papers mixed up. All right, let's go to verse 23. It says, "With deceitful promises he will make various alliances. He will become strong despite having only a handful of followers." Okay? Antiochus Epiphanes becomes strong with only having it's going to be, like I said before, kind of like how ISIS, all of a sudden, it's just like, all of a sudden, he's just a big world power. He comes on the scene out of nowhere, and here he is, and he's just taking over everything. And who is this guy? And it's going to be a lot like how the Antichrist comes into power. Okay, all of a sudden it's going to be like, who is this dude? And what's going on? And how does he have so much power? And he doesn't even really own anything, but for some reason he just keeps gaining power and gaining power. Well, this is Antiochus Epiphanes does this, and this is kind of like how what's going to be happening with the Antichrist. Okay. Deceitful promises. He will make alliances. So, he's backdooring his way into things, okay? Verse 24 says, without warning, he will enter the richest areas of the land. Then he will distribute among his followers the plunder and wealth of the rich, something his predecessors had never done. He will plot to overthrow strongholds, but this will only last for a short while. So let's talk about this. It says, he will distribute among his followers a plunder and wealth and rich, something his predecessors had never done. Okay? So, this is something that actually made Antiochus Epiphanes awesome in his soldiers' eyes. He was very generous. He distributes all the plunder and wealth. When they would go in to sack a town or a region, when he would get done, he would actually split all of the gold and silver and all of the plunder with his army, with his generals, okay, which is something his predecessors never did, okay? This made him very, very popular among his men. Just imagine we're going to war, right? We're going to war, and my buddy over here, John, he's the king, and when we get done with that war, John says, hey, come on over here, guys. I got something for you, I got something for you, got something for you, you take that, and you split everything evenly. Do you know how awesome that would be? You would do anything for that man. I mean, he is sharing all of what he has with you. This makes him very popular among his soldiers and his generals, and this is what helps him grow so fast and so quickly. These guys are just, yeah, man, this is awesome. Another thing you're going to see, this is what the Antichrist is going to be doing too. He's going to seem like awesome. Yeah, I'm going to give you this, very generous. Hey, I'm giving you all this stuff. The Antichrist, all he cares about really is power. He wants the money, but he really wants control and he wants power. And that's when he really gets sickening. It really gets sickening when you get into that type of thing. Okay? So verse 25. Verse 25, it says, then he will stir up his courage and raise a great army against the king of the south. The king of the south will go into battle with a mighty army, but to no avail, for there will be plots against him. So here we go. The Seleucid Empire under Antiochus Epiphanes, he starts going to do his campaign to the king of the south. Okay, he starts taking over parts of the Ptolemaic Empire. And the king of the south sets up a mighty army, but to no avail. I mean, it was not successful. Verse 26 says, his own household will cause his downfall. Whose own household? The king of the south house will cause his own downfall. His army will be swept away, and many will be killed. Okay? Verse 27, seeking nothing but each other's harm. These kings, what kings? We're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and we are talking about the king of the Ptolemaic Empire, which at this time is Ptolemy the Fourth. Okay? Make sure that's right. Okay? But anyways, Antiochus starts marching his army southwards. He is widely successful, and he pushes the Ptolemaic Empire all the way back to the brink of like Memphis and Alexandria. Antiochus Epiphanes takes over the Sinai Peninsula and everything. Okay, he's getting real close. Okay, and so it says in I think we were at verse 27, seeking nothing but each other's harm. These kings will plot against each other at the conference table, attempting to deceive each other. But it will make no difference, for the end will come at the appointed time. So Antiochus Epiphanes is like, hey, I'm not going to totally go all the way in there yet. There's still a stronghold there. I'm not going to completely take over Egypt, but they're right at the doorstep. And so now they're trying to do backdoor moves and trying to figure out how they can scam their way in there to overthrow one another. Okay? Verse 28 says, the king of the north will then turn home with great riches. On the way, he will set himself against the people of the Holy Covenant, doing much damage before continuing his journey. Here he goes. Antiochus Epiphanes goes up. He's kind of heading back north, and he stops in Israel, and he starts putting himself against the Holy Covenant. So this is where we start seeing the Maccabean, what we're talking about in the book of Maccabees, where he's a tyrant over there, and he sets his sights against the Holy Covenant and the people of Israel, and he starts making them not be able to worship the way they want to worship, and he really starts oppressing them, and just, all up in their face with his religion instead of the Lord, the book of the law that they're following. Okay? Verse 29 and 30. Verse 29 and 30, it says, then at the appointed time he will once again invade the south. But this time the result will be different. What does he do? Antiochus Epiphanes has enough, and he says, you know what? I'm invading the south. I'm going all the way into Egypt. I'm going into Memphis, and I'm going to go right to the doorstep of Alexandria. Alexandria was a port town. Very important city in Alexandria, right on the Mediterranean. Huge for trade. Still is to this day. Very, very important. Okay? So it says at verse 30, for warships from western coastlands will scare him off, and he will withdraw and return home. But he will vent his anger against the holy people, or the holy covenant, and reward those who forsake the covenant. All right. We're going to read verse 30, taking a couple different parts here. It says, for warships from western coastlands will scare him off. What happens here? Just like his father's old nemesis, he gets into Alexandria, and here comes the Roman Republic. And if you remember, Antiochus Epiphanes spent 15 years in prison in Rome. So here we go. Here comes the Roman Republic, they are informed about the affairs happening in Egypt, especially in Alexandria. Okay? Like I said, the city of Alexandria is one of the greatest ports and main hubs in the Mediterranean, then and now. Okay? It is filled with fine wines, linens, fresh grain, along with many other goods. And back then, the Romans relied on trade with the Ptolemaic Empire, and especially the city of Alexandria. Okay? They had a really good thing going here. Okay, the Roman Republic did not want the city in the hands of a tyrant king, Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, they didn't want anything to mess that up. They had a good thing going with the Alexandrians down there. Trade was good. They were making money. They weren't being taxed too much. They had a good system going, and they knew if Antiochus Epiphanes came in there and took it over, everything would change. Okay. It would be taxing, and where the ports and goods that they were getting was just going to be under the hands of somebody they did not want in the hands of. Okay? So, this is kind of what takes place here. Okay? And it goes down like this. The Roman Republic comes into Alexandria and kind of stops Antiochus Epiphanes in his tracks, and it kind of hey, let's have a meeting. Let's have a meeting real quick. So, the Roman Republic comes led by a commissioner named, and let me get this right, Proconsul Gaius Papilius Lianus. And I think I said it right. It's a very tough thing to do. So he comes into town. He is the Roman commissioner here. Okay, and he requests a meeting with Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucid king. And so here, as the story goes, Antiochus Epiphanes says, okay, let's meet. The commanders of my army and the commanders of your army, let's go ahead and do this. Let's hash out this meeting. And so Antiochus Epiphanes lays out his hand. And when he lays out his hand to shake the other ones in friendship with, we're just going to call him Gaius for now. He goes out to lay his hand with Gaius, and Gaius takes tablets from the Senate of Rome and lays them on his hand. And Gaius says, Antiochus, I need you to read these instructions right now. And so Antiochus says, okay, this is kind of weird. I thought we were having a quick meeting, but all right. So he reads the tablets from the Senate of Rome, basically telling him what he needs to do. If he doesn't do what he is instructed to do, that some bad stuff's going to happen, and lays out, hey, these are the terms of the negotiation that we're coming to terms of. So he reads it, and so as he's reading it, Gaius says, I need you to give me an answer of what you're going to do after you get done reading. So Antiochus gets done reading the tablets, and he turns to Gaius and he says, let me consult with my advisors and generals, and I'll get back to you in a little while, or a few days, few weeks, whatever it may be, and we'll go from there. While Antiochus Epiphanes is still speaking to Gaius, Gaius takes a stick. He takes a stick, and while Antiochus is talking, he takes the stick and he draws a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes, a big circle, while he's talking. And Antiochus Epiphanes is looking at him saying, what are you doing? What is going on? And Gaius says, before you step out of that circle, you had better give me a reply to give to the Senate. Whoa. So Antiochus is like, okay, very uneasy. Didn't know if he was about to die right then and there, or if he doesn't agree to the terms, he's probably thinking, I'm about to go to war right now. I might not even get out of this circle. And so after kind of stuttering a second and a little bit of quietness for a couple seconds, Antiochus Epiphanes says, I will do what the Senate thinks is right. And so he steps out of the circle. The meeting is adjourned. And Antiochus Epiphanes goes back with his tail between his legs, and he extracts his anger and fury, especially on the Holy Covenant at this time. It is right after this when he puts up the statue of Zeus and does all this crazy stuff in Israel and in the temple. Okay, but he, once again, just like his father, the old nemesis, Rome, takes him out, and he is out of Alexandria, and this would be the last time he tries to conquer the Ptolemaic Empire. Okay? So it says in verse 31, his army will take over the temple fortress, pollute the sanctuary, put a stop to the daily sacrifices, and set up the sacrilegious object that causes desecration. Okay? So here we go. Here he goes. He is really putting it to the Israelites up there and the Jews. And so I know it says he puts up the statue that causes desecration, the abomination of desolation. Okay, like I told you before, we have a dual prophecy going on here. Eventually, the Antichrist is going to set up the abomination of desolation as well. Okay, and I don't want you to confuse a lot of people. Well, that's it right there. It's already been, the prophecy's already been foretold. That's it. That's all there is to it. Guys, I got the scripture right here. Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16. Jesus speaking here. So, okay, it's Jesus. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about. The sacrilegious object that causes desecration, the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. Jesus Christ is telling you, this is talking about the end times here, of that the abomination of desolation is going to be set up in the holy place in the end times, in the 7-year tribulation. This cannot be the one that Antiochus Epiphanes set up. I said this last lesson. This is 150 years before Jesus is even born. Okay, Jesus is not going to be talking about the one Antiochus Epiphanes set up if he says you will see what will take place later in the future when the abomination of desolation is standing in the holy place. Okay? So, let's read 1 Maccabees. I want to read 1 Maccabees to you guys. Okay, and it's going to take a while because it's kind of a lot, but I just kind of wanted to do this to just show you really how amazing this chapter is. So 1 Maccabees chapter 1. And I'll just read it. I got to take a drink of water. A lot of talking here. All right. It says, after Alexander the Macedonian, who was Alexander Macedonian? This is Alexander the Great, Philip's son, who came from the land of Kittim. This is the islands of the Greeks. Okay, this is Macedonia area. It's actually part of the, what do you call it? No, we won't get into that. Had defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes. He became king in his place, having first ruled in Greece. He fought many battles, captured fortresses, and put the kings of the earth to death. He advanced to the ends of the earth, gathering plunder from many nations. The earth fell silent before him, and his heart became proud and arrogant. He collected a very strong army and won dominion over provinces, nations, rulers, and they paid him tribute. But after all of this, he took to his bed, realizing that he was going to die. So he summoned his noblest officers that had been brought up with him from his youth and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. Remember we said on his deathbed, he divides his kingdom, right? He said, I'm going to give this to you, give this to you, give this to you. But what happened, with the Diadachi War? Some of the guys were like, hey, he didn't say that, or I don't care if he said that. We're going to war, right? So it says, Alexander had reigned 12 years when he died. So his officers took over his kingdom, each in his own territory. And after his death, they all put on diadems, which is like crowns, okay, and became kings. And so did their sons after them for many years, multiplying evils on the earth. Let me go back here. There sprang from these a sinful offshoot, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus, once a hostage of Rome. He became king in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So here we go. Who is a sinful offshoot? Antiochus Epiphanes. This is one of those four kingdoms broke up, right? This is what takes place. And King Antiochus was Antiochus the Great. It was his son, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was taken a hostage in Rome, right? We just talked about that. And he becomes king in the 137th year, the kingdom of Greeks. So, guys, it's amazing how accurate this is, okay? It says, in those days there appeared in Israel transgressors of the law who seduced many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles all around us. Since we separated from them, many evils have come upon us. Okay? A lot of the Jews at this time decided to go the way of the Greeks and the Gentiles and started worshiping their gods. Okay, this is what the Book of Maccabees is, what the Hanukkah is all about. This is where we get the story of Hanukkah, is from the first and second Maccabees. The proposal was agreeable. Some from among the people promptly went to the king, and he authorized them to introduce the ordinances of the Gentiles. Thereupon they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom. They disguised their circumcisions and abandoned the holy covenant. They allied themselves with the Gentiles and sold themselves into wrongdoing. It says, when the kingdom seemed secure, Antiochus undertook to become king of the land of Egypt and to rule over both kingdoms. He invaded Egypt with a strong force, with chariots, elephants, and cavalry, and with a large fleet, and to make war with Ptolemy, the king of Egypt. Here we go. This is when he decides to what? He's going down there to take over the kingdom of Egypt, right? Ptolemy was frightened at his presence and fled. Where does he flee? He flees to Alexandria. And many were wounded and fell dead. The fortified cities of the land of Egypt were captured, and Antiochus plundered the land of Egypt. He does this, but like I just said, he gets to Alexandria and he's stopped by the Roman Republic. He doesn't fully take over Egypt. He gets to the doorstep, but not fully. But he takes over a lot of the cities up and around that area. Okay? After Antiochus had defeated Egypt in the 143rd year, he returned and went up against Israel and against Jerusalem with a strong force. He insolently entered the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the lampstands and the light with all its utensils, the offering table, the cups and bowls and golden censers, and the curtain, the cornices and the golden ornament and the facade of the temple. He stripped it all off. Then he took away the silver and gold and the precious vessels. He also took all the hidden treasures he could find. Taking all this, he went back to his own country. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. And there was a great mourning throughout all Israel. All the rulers and all the elders groaned. Young women and men languished, and the beauty of the women faded. Every bridegroom took up lamentations, while the bride sitting in her chamber mourned. And the land quaked on account of its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent the Masaean commander to the cities of Judah who's the king, Antiochus Epiphanes, sends the cities of Judah, and he came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He spoke to them deceitfully in peaceful terms, and they believed him. Kind of like what the Antichrist does, right? Then he attacked the city suddenly in a great onslaught and destroyed many of the people of Israel. He plundered the city and set it to fire, demolished its houses and its surrounding walls. And they took captive the women and children and seized the animals. They built up the city of David with a high, strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. There they installed a sinful race, transgressors of the law, who fortified themselves inside of it. They stored up weapons and provisions, depositing their plunder they had collected from Jerusalem, and they became a great snare. The citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary and a wicked adversary to Israel at all the times. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary. They defiled the sanctuary. Because of them, the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled away. She became the abode of strangers. She became a stranger to her own offspring, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary became desolate as a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths to shame, her honor to contempt. As her glory had been, so great was her dishonor. Her exaltation was turned into mourning. I know this is a long chapter. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and abandoned their particular customs. All the Gentiles conformed to the command of the king, and many Israelites delighted in this religion. They're installing the Greek religion here, and some of the people were cool with it. Okay, they sacrificed to the idols and profaned the Sabbath. The king sent letters to my messengers to Jerusalem and to the cities of Judah, ordering them to follow customs foreign to their land, to prohibit burnt offerings, sacrifices, and libations in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and the feast days, to desecrate the sanctuary and sacred ministers, to build pagan altars and temples and shrines, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals on the altar here, to leave their sons uncircumcised, and to defile themselves with every kind of impurity and abomination, so that they might forget the law and change all of its ordinances. Whoever refused to act according to the command of the king was put to death. In words such as these he wrote to his whole kingdom. He appointed inspectors over all the people, and he ordered the cities of Judah to offer sacrifices, each city in turn. Many of the people, those who abandoned the law, joined them and committed evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding wherever places of refuge could be found. Listen to this now. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the year 145, the king erected the abomination of desolation upon the altar of burnt offerings. And in the surrounding cities of Judah, they built pagan altars. The 15th day of the month of Kislev. Okay? So here we go. This is when he is erecting this abomination. This was the statue of Zeus that Antiochus Epiphanes sets up. Okay, it says it in here too. But we know that the abomination is also a future event that's going to be set up with the Antichrist, right? Or then the false prophet, right? We already talked about that. So this is what happens. It says, they also burn incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. I think Kislev, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's kind of like end of November, early December, if I'm not mistaken. Any scrolls of the law that they found, they tore up and burned. Whoever was found with a scroll of the covenant and whoever observed the law was condemned to death by royal decree. So they used their power against Israel, against those who were caught each month in the cities. And listen to this, on the 25th day of each month, they sacrificed on the pagan altar that was over the altar of burnt offerings. Guys, the 25th day of each month is not really a great day. This was very pagan back in these days. The 25th day represents when they would sacrifice a lot of things and worship certain idols, okay? We won't go to all that extreme right now. But anyways, you guys know what I'm talking about. And they hung their babies from their necks. Their families also, and those who had circumcised them were killed. But many in Israel were determined to resolve in their hearts not to eat anything unclean. They preferred to die rather than to be defiled with food or to profane the holy covenant. And they did die, and a very great wrath was upon Israel. Okay, so that's the first chapter of the Maccabees. I know it was long. I wanted you guys to read it. Some of you guys have probably never seen that before. But it is important. It's very important. It was very important in those days, especially we're comparing the Antichrist to Antiochus Epiphanes, and we get to see what took place during this time, the so-called silence days of Israel. Okay, and so this is where we get the story of Hanukkah. Some of you guys probably don't really know what Hanukkah, or you've heard of it, but don't really know what took place. So after all this takes place with Antiochus Epiphanes and the statue of Zeus and all this pagan offerings, what takes place is we have a Maccabean revolt. That's why we have Maccabees. They have the Maccabean revolt. They end up driving out Antiochus Epiphanes and some of his advisors, and what happens is the people decide, hey, we've sinned greatly against the Lord, and we're going to cleanse the temple, and we're going to purify ourselves and the temple, and we're going to rededicate ourselves to the Lord. That's what Hanukkah is all about. And they also call it the Festival of Lights. And they decorate, lights and stuff around the cities and stuff like that. It's Hanukkah, kind of like what we do. Okay, in a sense, they just don't have Christmas trees. Okay, but what takes place is when they cleanse the temple. Okay, when they end up cleansing the temple, they light what we call, and I'm just keeping it real short, they light what? The menorah, right? They light the menorah on the first day. What they had was they had enough oil for that menorah to burn one day. And each day, these priests are coming in there to check on this thing to put more oil in it, but it never went out. And so they only had enough oil for one day, but it burned for 8 days. Okay, and that's why we have this great celebration of Hanukkah and the Festival of Lights with the Israelites or the Jewish community of the 8 days of Hanukkah. Okay, and so that's what that means. It's that miracle that took place by the Lord in the temple, with the 8 days of that menorah burning. And it also meant the rededication of the temple and the rededication to the people to the Lord. That's really the main thing. It was rededicating the temple, but the people humbled themselves and they rededicated themselves to the Lord. Okay? And so it was good to know that. Let's go ahead and read verse 32 and we get on out of here. It says, he will flatter and win over those who have violated the covenant. Who we're talking about? Antiochus Epiphanes. But the people who know their God will be strong and will resist him. All right. Like I said before, we are done for today. We are going to get to the rest of Daniel chapter 11 next week. We will knock that out. We got a lot of comparisons to the Antichrist and Antiochus Epiphanes here, a lot of parallel prophecies, like I said, and then when you get to verse 40, then we make the switch. So guys, I know it was a lot to sink in. I love you. Hey, listen, 2 more lessons left and we're done with Daniel. I love you guys. Stay true to Jesus. Jesus number 1 to 931.